Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf tzadi aleph. Today's daf is sponsored by Amy Cohn in memory of her father-in-law Arthur Cohn, Asher Michael ben Mordechai, who was just niftar. He's a wonderfully creative person with a huge heart, an enormous Baal Chesed and defender of Zion who loved his family above all. Yehi Zechro Baruch. Okay, we're going to get started today. Two quick messages. If anyone is interested in joining our course Gemara Matkilot in Hebrew, part 2. It's starting next week on Wednesday. And the second thing is that, the second thing is that all the classes for starting Tuesday through next Monday are already up on the site. Thanks for our new site. We now have a way to do that in a very organized manner. If you're listening through the podcast, it'll go up on the day of. And if you're listening to YouTube, it'll go up on the day of. But you can find all the things ahead of time on our site. So there will be no live Zoom for those days, Tuesday through next Monday. We'll start back again on Tuesday. Tomorrow, class as usual. Okay, with that, we'll get started. We have a long daf ahead of us. So we start with a question in the Gemara, which really is not connected to our Mishna directly, although we'll see why it's mentioned in this Mishna. It really connects back to the Mishna on daf, the two Mishnayot on Pei Tet, which both were from the beginning of the chapter. The most common, and the more frequent, I should say. We'll talk about the difference between frequent and common today. The more frequent one goes first, and the more sanctified one goes first. What if there's a conflict between the two? Right? End of tzadi amubet. Tadir umikudash ezman kodim. What if you have a situation where you have something that's common and frequent, and something that's more sanctified? Which one goes first? And right, do we say tadir because it's tadir or mikudash because it's mikudash? Okay, that wasn't really so necessary. That part was kind of obvious which one wins out. So the Gemara is going to bring in this section 6 attempts to get to an answer. In almost all of them, they're going to say that tadir is kodem, except for one. But in the end, there's not going to be an answer. There's not going to be a conclusion. Then we're going to have another question, kind of a similar takeoff of that. And also we're going to have 4 attempts to answer the question. And we'll see if we succeed. Okay, so let's start with our first source, Tashma. They're first going to quote 3 sections from the beginning Mishnah of the chapter. Okay? Tashma, Timidin kodmin lemusafin, afagav lemusafin kadishe. What's more sanctified, the daily tamid sacrifice that's brought in the morning and afternoon every single day, or the Shabbat sacrifices or the holiday ones, those special ones for the holiday? Obviously, if I asked you, you would tell me the ones for the holiday are more sanctified than the Ola, than the typical, the Ola Tamid, the one we bring every day, because that's a daily thing and that's a Shabbos thing. So they say, and therefore, what do you see here? The Musafin comes second. That was the case used for Tadir, the more frequent one, the daily Tamid sacrifice. So that seems to prove, even though the Musafim are more sanctified, the daily one comes first because that's more frequent. To which the Gemara says, what are you talking about? This is an interesting point. Atu Shabbat lemusafin ahane, l'tmidin lo ahane. What makes the Musafim sanctified? The fact that they're brought on Shabbat. Even though they're also brought for Shabbat, but they're also brought on Shabbat. To which they say, also the Korban Tamid on Shabbat has a different nature than the Korban Tamid every day. The Korban Tamid on Shabbat, even though it's something you do every day, when you do it on Shabbat, it has the sanctity of Shabbat in it. So there's no reason to say that the Korbanot Musafim are any more sanctified than the Korban Olah on Shabbat. The Korban Olah takes on a different nature when it's Shabbat. An interesting explanation. We're going to use the same theory for the next bunch of proofs. Okay, we're going to try to bring a proof and then reject it for the exact same reason. Tashma, you can see they're basically the same kind of proof. It says in that Mishnah, Musfei Shabbat kodmin lemusfei Rosh Chodesh. You bring Shabbat before you bring, right, when it's Shabbat Rosh Chodesh, which Shabbat Hashem next week will be Shabbat Rosh Chodesh. So you bring the Musafim of Shabbat before you bring the ones of Rosh Chodesh. So period. That's the proof. The proof is, what do you see? Shabbat comes first, even though the fact that it's Shabbat Rosh Chodesh, right? Rosh Chodesh, we assume, because it's actually a good question, really, whether you would say this, but they claim right now the Rosh Chodesh are more sanctified than Shabbat. Rashi says because it's called a Moed Rosh Chodesh, called a holiday, which we assume has more sanctity than Shabbat, which I guess could be a topic of debate. But they assume right now the Rosh Chodesh has more sanctity to it, the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, to which the Gemara says, Ata Rosh Chodesh Musafim Didei Ahane, the Musfei Shabbat Lo Ahane. What do you mean? When it's Rosh Chodesh, it's true you bring extra sacrifices, and they're imbued with extra holiness because they're brought on Rosh Chodesh. But same thing with the Musaf of Shabbat that's brought on Rosh Chodesh. It also has more sanctity to it. So That doesn't prove anything, because then again, what we're going to have is two things at the same level of sanctity, and that's why tadir, frequent, is going to win out, because there is no one more sanctified than the other. Same thing with this next one. Tashma, Musfei Rosh Chodesh, Kadmin Musfei Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah, when you have to bring korbanot also for Rosh Chodesh, because Rosh Hashanah is also Rosh Chodesh, you bring the ones for Rosh Hashanah Rosh Chodesh before Rosh Hashanah. Even though, obviously, what would you say is more sanctified? The sacrifices for Rosh Hashanah, for the holiday, rather than for Rosh Chodesh. And yet, the one that's more frequent, which happens every month, rather than Rosh Hashanah, which only happens once a year, is going to come first. You know what the Gemara is going to say, right? So here they say, Afagav de Rosh Hashanah Kadesha, even though that's obviously more sanctified, to which they say, what do you mean? Atu Rosh Hashanah l'musfei dideh and l'musfei Rosh Chodesh la'hane. Again, the sacrifices of Rosh Chodesh that you bring on Rosh Hashanah are imbued with the same sanctity as the Rosh Hashanah sacrifices, because it's the sanctity of the day has its effects on all the korbanot of the day. So again, you have equal sanctity, and then frequency wins out. That doesn't prove anything. Now we're going to switch to an entirely different Mishna, not related at all to our topics, not related to sacrifices at all, but another use of tadir v'sheno tadir, a very famous one. It's a machloket, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, which bracha comes first in kiddush. Is it the bracha on the wine or the bracha on Shabbos? Right, on Friday night kiddush, what do? We do wine and then Mikadesh Shabbat. So, Tashma, Davar Achir, and that's a machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. Birkat hayayin tadira, u'birkat hayamin tadira. Why does the bracha on the wine come first, according to this source, this Mishnah? The birkat hayayin is much more frequent, because first of all, in those days, they drank wine every single day. So it's something that happens on a daily basis. And birkat hayamin tadira, but, right, the Shabbos bracha obviously isn't so frequent. Tadir v'sheno tadir kodem. Now, afagav de birkat hayom kadisha. What's more sanctified, obviously? Not the wine, but the bracha of Kedushat Hayom, Shabbat itself. To which they say, again, Atu, Shabbat, L'birchat Hayom Ahane, L'birchat Hayom Lo Ahane, same answer. What are you talking about? The bracha on wine on Friday night is different than the bracha on wine every day. The bracha on wine Friday night is imbued with sanctity. So, rejected. Source number 4, rejected. Source number 5. This time, it's not going to be a Tannaitic source, it's going to be Rabbi Yochanan. Shma da'amar Rabbi Yochanan. Here's the famous case I mentioned the other day. Halacha, the halacha is, if you forgot to say mincha in the morning and it's now the afternoon, mitpalel adam shel mincha v'achar kach shel musafin. So first you daven mincha, then you daven musaf, even though musaf is obviously more sanctified, right? Because again, musaf is the special one for that day, and mincha you say every day. Atu Shabbat, l'tfilat musafin ahane, l'tfilat mincha lo ahane, same rejection. What do you mean? Mincha on Shabbat has its own sanctity to it, right? The same sanctity that Musaf has, because it's on Shabbat. Shabbat imbues all the tefillah with sanctity, right? Mincha on Shabbat is not the same as mincha every day, and therefore that's not a proof. Because again, they're going to be at the same level of sanctity, and then the more frequent one is going to win out. Sixth and final source. This one's a little bit different. And this, finally going to understand why this comes up in our Mishnah. Because our Mishnah is going to be quoted here, and from there they're going to try to get to an answer. Tashma, shlamim shel emesh, chatat asham shel yom. If you have yesterday's shlamim and today's chatat and asham, shlamim shel emesh kodmim. What comes first? The shlamim from yesterday. Ha'idi v'idi diyom. Now, what can you infer from this Mishnah? That if both of them were from today, the shlamim of today and the chatat and the asham of today, what would come first, obviously? Right? The only reason the shlamim came first was because they were from yesterday. But if they were from today, then the chatat and the asham would take precedence. So, ha'idi v'idi diyom, chataf asham kadme. Now, it's not what it says in the Mishnah, but it's what you can infer from the Mishnah. Va'af agav de shlamim tadire, which is more frequent, or maybe we should say more common. Because there's no frequency. What's frequency usually? Frequency is it comes at a particular time, right? Like the korban tamid is frequent because it happens every day. The korban Rosh Chodesh is frequent because it happens once a month. The only one so far that didn't really fit that rule is the wine, because the wine is just more common rather than more frequent. Now, I did say they drank it every day, and that could make it frequent, but it's not like we drink it every day because we have to drink it every day, as opposed to the korban tamid, which we have to bring every day. So it's a little bit different. The shlamim, why did they say the shlamim are more and I'm going to use the word common and not frequent, they're more common because people bring them for voluntary offerings all the time. How often is it that somebody sins and has to bring a sin offering, right? There's only particular sins that you bring a sin offering for, and there's only particular sins you bring a guilt offering for. So they don't happen all the time. I mean, people do sin, but again, it has to be associated with karet. If it's that, the chatat and the asham has 5 unique cases where you bring it. They're not the most common of sacrifices. So, and yet, what do you see here? The asham and the chatat will come before the shlamim, which is much more common. To which Amar Rava, this is not, and this is the first attempt to say the opposite, which is specifically kedusha comes first. They're more sanctified, the chata and the asham, because they're kodshei kodshim, versus shlamim, which is kodshim kalim. So Rava says, matzui kamarta, tadir kamibayalan. You're okay in English. The best way I could translate these terms is common and frequent. You're talking common, we're talking frequent. Okay. The fact that it's more likely people are going to bring shlamim and there's more of them brought in the temple, that's not the same thing as frequent. There's no sort of frequency. There's no set time where you bring all these shlamim. So you can't ask, matzoi lo kamibayalan. They weren't asking about matzoi. Okay, so that was a rejection of this as a proof. Amarle Rav Huna bar Yehuda Rava. But now Rav Huna bar Yehuda wants to question Rava's rejection of that answer. He says, Atu matzoi lav tadir. Is matzoi and tadir not the same thing? Let's look at this braita, where we see that they use something that's matzoi, common, and they call it tadir. Okay? And that's going to kind of try to be an attempt to reject Rava, which would then reinstate the answer that, in fact, we go by more sanctified. So it says here, the question in this braita, it's a midrash halacha, Rashi tells us from Torah Kohanim, which is a midrash halacha, on Sefer Vayikra, about a korban chatat, a sin offering, as I mentioned just before, kind of by the side, but a korban chatat, a sin offering, is brought if you transgressed something that has karet associated with it when you did it accidentally. What if you didn't bring a korban Pesach, or you didn't do a brit mila? Now, both of those also have karet associated with it, but they're unique because they're both what we call a bitul aseh. They're the only cases where you didn't do a positive commandment, as opposed to transgressing a negative commandment. You didn't fulfill a mitzvah, and you're going to get karet for it. So what if you didn't do the korban Pesach or you didn't do a brit milah? Do you have to bring a sin offering? Okay, that's the question. So they say no, you don't, and they say here otziat Pesach she'eno tadir. I'll get rid of Pesach because it's not frequent. Velo otziat hamilah she'i tadira. This is in a back and forth argument. They say maybe just Pesach you won't bring a chata because it's not frequent. But I won't exclude brit milah from this, and maybe you would have to do a brit milah because it's more frequent. So now, what do you see here? Brit milah does not come its intervals, particular intervals. So yet they're saying it's tadir. Okay, in the end they reject this argument. That's not what's important. The important thing is they define brit milah as being tadir. So what do you see here? Tadir could be common. It's more common to have a brit milah. Babies are born all the time. Pesach happens once a year. So they have 2 rejections to this point. My tadira b'mitzvot. Maybe it's called tadir, it's frequent because it's not exactly frequent, but it means it's full of many mitzvot. And this is a source that comes up a lot, that there's 13 britot in the Torah, 13 mentions of brit. It has very high prominence. And maybe because of that you need to bring a sin offering. And the tadira here means frequency of mitzvot. There's just a lot of mitzvot associated with it. It has a completely different meaning here. Or, mila legabe Pesach ki tadir damya. Maybe it just means comparatively to Pesach, because Pesach is once a year. Also here, when we were comparing it before, it was comparing shlamim and chata. Neither of them had any sort of frequency. In this case, the Pesach has a certain intervals, time intervals where it happens once a year. And relatively speaking, there's definitely going to be more of the other. And therefore, they're comparing it to something that had a certain time interval. And maybe that's why they use that language. But it doesn't mean that we can apply that same language and use it for shlamim. So shlamim you can't call tadir. That's just not relevant. And therefore, you can't prove anything. So in the end, we have no answer to this question of when you have 2 korbanot in front of you, one is mekudash and one is frequent, which do you do first? No answer. Next question. Ibaylu. Tadir v'sheino tadir. So now we're back to you have a frequent korban, a less frequent korban. V'kadim v'shachat l'sheino tadir. And then the kohen wasn't paying attention or made a mistake. and did the one that was less frequent first. But all he did was slaughter the animal. Now he has the blood, and he's supposed to sprinkle the blood. But he's also supposed to sacrifice some other korban first. So what does he do first? Look, you already slaughtered it. Sprinkle the blood. We're always worried that the blood is going to coagulate. We don't want that to happen. If you remember, on Yom Kippur, we have a situation where we have to have a guy called the mimares. He's the mixer. And he stands there mixing the blood because we have the blood of the par and the blood of the seir, and you have to do one at a time. And there's someone mixing the whole time so that the blood doesn't coagulate. So do we say, look, you already slaughtered it, just go ahead and finish it, and then we'll deal with the one that's supposed to come first, that we didn't deal with first. Or maybe we give it to the mixer. We find a guy who can just stand there mixing the blood, right? Obviously a kohen. Kohen stands there mixing the blood. We push it aside for momentarily, right? In a sense, it's a bit of a rejection not a rejection, but a lack of respect to the sacrifice that we already brought. But we're going to mix it to make sure it doesn't coagulate. Go do the one we were supposed to do first, finish it, and then come back and do the blood of that one. So that's the question. So first, now, of these 4 sources we're going to bring, 3 are ones that we just brought in the previous sugya. Rav Huna Misura. So Rav Huna Misura says, Tashma, let's learn from here. Now here we're going to really get into our Mishnah. Shlamim shel emesh, chataf asham shel yom, shel emesh kodem l'shel yom. Okay, now, when we read the Mishnah, we read it in one way. There's actually 2 ways to read this Mishnah. Okay? The way we read it is, you have meat from yesterday, of the shlamim, which can only be eaten till today, right, till the end of today. You have meat of the chataf yasham of today, which can be eaten through the night. So which comes first? Shel emesh kodem l'shel yom, right? We're going to eat the shlamim first because the time for shlamim kind of ends before, and it's also from yesterday, so we're going to eat it first. But some people read this Mishnah, that's actually talking about sprinkling the blood, which comes first. And shlamim shel emesh doesn't mean we sacrificed it yesterday. Shlamim shel emesh means we brought it into the temple yesterday. The animal was brought in to be dealt with, but wasn't dealt with yesterday. And now, it's kind of like first come, first serve type of thing. So that one's already been waiting since yesterday. So that one, even though neither was slaughtered yet, okay, not the shlamim and not the chatat or asham, right? It's shlamim versus chatat or asham. So you have the shlamim that was brought into the temple yesterday to be dealt with, but wasn't dealt with. And now you have a new korban chatat that comes into the temple. So which one goes first? So the shlamim from yesterday gets slaughtered first. Okay? Now, the Gemara infers from the Mishnah. Now pay attention to this inference. Hadiyom dumia de emesh. Now they're going to say, from here, what can you infer? Now before we had a different inference, but now we're going to infer that if you had a shlamim from today that was like a shlamim of yesterday, it wouldn't come first. Okay? In other words, if it's a shlamim really from yesterday, it comes first. But if it's today, but kind of something about it is like as if it was yesterday, it's not going to come first. So what do they mean? Hechidami. What on earth does that mean? That sounds super confusing. Dekadim shachte l'shlamim. First you slaughter the shlamim. In that case, meaning it was a shlamim of today, but you slaughtered it first, which is sort of like from yesterday, because it already took precedence. That's exactly our case. And now you have a chataf asham, they go first. Because the inference is only if it's really from yesterday. But if it's from today, but you actually slaughtered it already, so that sort of makes it like yesterday, that you would think it would have precedence, it doesn't get precedence. Which sounds like, basically what? Exactly what we asked. If you slaughtered the shlamim first, and then you realize your mistake, have someone mix the blood, so it doesn't coagulate, go and deal with the chatat, or the asham, and then come back to it. So there's your answer. To which the Gemara rejects and says, who's to say that's the inference? Dilma shlamim de emesh, v'chatat v'asham v'yom, hechi mishkachat. Maybe you didn't understand the case of the Mishnah. When we said we have shlamim from yesterday, and the chatat and asham of today, what would the case be? Deshachtinu litravayu. Maybe they're both already slaughtered and you're already mixing the blood. Avalo shachtinu litravayu tibayalach. In other words, maybe that's not the case, that you slaughtered one and you didn't slaughter the other. Maybe the case is, if it's the case where it's like yesterday, maybe it means that you slaughtered it already, and if you slaughtered it already, then we would say both bloods are there, and in any case, we're mixing bloods, so let the chatat nasham come first, or if it was really the shlamim from yesterday, that one would come first, if it was like yesterday that you did it first, right? But that's a case where they're both already slaughtered, and anyway, one of the bloods needs to be mixed, which means it doesn't teach you anything about our case. Lo shachtinu l'travai, if you didn't slaughter them both, we still have our question, in other words, and that's our question, where you slaughtered one, do you mix that blood and do the other one, or not? And then we can't really learn from here anywhere. We don't anything, and we don't have an answer. So that was our first attempt to get to an answer. Second one, Tashma davar acher berkat hayayin tadira or berkat hayomina tadira. Okay, the bracha on wine, remember, is the more frequent on Shabbat in kiddush, and berkat hayom is ena tadira. So tadir v'sheino tadir kodim. Now, what do we say here? Really, what happened? First Shabbat came in. That took precedence because it came in first. Because as soon as Shabbat starts, the yom is kadosh. Then, right, the wine came, and yet we still do the wine first, okay? So that would seem like if we started with the wrong one, right, we continue with that one. So now they say, no, hachinami kevan de atyan keman de shechite travayudami. No, because you already brought the wine to the table. It's not like the wine is already there also. It's true that when Shabbat started, first you had the kedushat hayom. But at this point where we're standing to kiddush, we have both, and they're both in front of us. It's like the case where you slaughter both the animals, and one has to wait anyway. Then we're going to go with tadir. Okay, but it's not similar to the situation that we had before. Tashma, source 3. Tamar Rabbi Yochanan, and it's going to be the same type of idea here. Halacham mitpalel adam shel mincha v'achar kach shel musafim. Now again, what happened? Musaf came first, and yet then comes mincha, and then we go with mincha, and we push off, right? We put musaf on hold. So it sounds like, again, if it's done in the wrong order, right, you're going to push it off anyway. So, hachanami, kevan demata isma mincha, kevan deshrite travayudami. No, because at this point, mincha's already come into play. So you really have both in front of you, and one's going to have to be pushed off, so tadir is going to win out. But it's not the same as the blood, right? You have the blood of the shlamim, and you haven't even started slaughtering the other one. What do you do then? That's a whole different question. So again, same type of rejection for all these cases. Fourth and final source here, Amar le Rav Acha b'rei Rav Ashi le Rav Huna, shachato kodem chatzot pasul. Okay, now we're talking about the korban Pesach. You're supposed to slaughter the korban Pesach after midday. What if you slaughtered it before midday, on the 14th, right, Erev Pesach? It's pasul, disqualified completely. This isn't really important yet. It's just building up the case. It says it has to be bein ha'arbaim, in the afternoon. So it's pasul. But what happens? In the afternoon, what comes first? The korban tamid of the afternoon comes first. Remember, you bring one in the morning, one in the afternoon. You have to bring that first, and then you do the korban Pesach. So kodem litamid, what if you accidentally slaughtered it before the korban tamid? It's kasher. Now they say, what do you do though? If you slaughtered it before the korban tamid, what do you do? If you do that and then realize your mistake, you stop, you have someone mix the blood, and you go and you deal with the korban tamid, okay? Until the blood of the korban tamid is thrown. Once the korban tamid blood is taken care of, then you go back and you deal with the blood of the korban Pesach. That seems like a perfect, clear proof for what we're looking for. You did it in the wrong order. It's not the tadir one. What do? You stop, mix the blood, do the more frequent one, and come back. But they're also going to reject this one. Now, don't be confused by the language here. It says here that you did the korban tamid first. Now, what do you mean? You didn't do the korban tamid first. You did the korban Pesach first. Right? That's exactly the whole point. They said you did the Pesach, and now you're supposed to do the Tamid, or you're supposed to do the Pesach. Which one do? You do the Tamid. They said, no. This is a case where the kohen accidentally did the Pesach first. But then he didn't ask, what am I supposed to do now? He immediately went and slaughtered the Tamid. He realizes his mistake, goes and slaughters the Tamid. That's when we say you mix the blood. Again, just like all the other rejections of the other cases, where we said this isn't a case where you haven't slaughtered yet. If you haven't slaughtered it, maybe you wait. All these cases are where both are slaughtered. You're going to have to mix the blood of one anyway. You're going to choose the one that's more frequent. And that's exactly what they say the case is here. And in fact, this one, at least we can even prove from the language that it makes more sense to say this is the case. Because Amar le Rav Acha Saba le Rav Ashi, matnitin nami daika. You can infer from the language of that Mishnah, because what does it say? Dekatane ad sheyizarei kadam, v'lo katane ad sheyishchot v'yizarei kadam. It says, what do? You mix the blood until the blood of the korban tamid, the daily sacrifice, is poured on the mizbeach. And it doesn't say, wait until you slaughter it and sprinkle the blood. Now, it's not the most convincing, because in the end, you have to wait until it's slaughtered and sprinkle the blood. Let's say that was the reading. It would still be until the blood is sprinkled, because that's what you have to complete until. But there is some sort of logic to saying, it sounds like just sprinkle the blood of the tamid and then go back to the Pesach, which sounds like maybe both the bloods were in front of you already. Anyway, one of them needed to be mixed, and that's why we go by the frequent. So in the end, we have no proof, Shema Minah. From there, we're left without an answer to this question. So both these questions of today leave us very unsatisfied, because we really don't have an answer. Tadir and Mikudash, which one comes first? Frequent and more sanctified. If you have a conflict there, which one goes first, we don't know. And Tadir v'sheino tadil, and then you accidentally slaughter the eno tadil, and then, right, the less frequent one you slaughter first. What do? Do you mix the blood, or do you just finish it up and go back and do the other one? So it's very interesting in terms of, you can imagine these questions came up all the time, which is even more interesting that they don't even come up with a conclusion as to, the Gemara doesn't include, obviously the poskim come up with, methods of how we determine what to do here, but the Gemara doesn't really end up with a conclusion. And I'm sure these things came up all the time, because the Kohanim had all these sacrifices and they had to prioritize. It's like everything in our lives. We always have to prioritize. What do we do first? What do we do next? We're forever going through our list, and what do I start with? What do I end with? What are the things I'm never going to get to on my list? But right, this is exactly, you can imagine the real goings on in the temple and what the decisions they had to be dealing with on an all the time basis. Okay, last part for this Mishnah. B'kulam kohanim risha'in. Okay, they can cook. The last thing in the Mishnah was, or not last, but toward the end of the Mishnah, they can cook the meat any way they want, roast it, bake it, okay, boil it. So, or they didn't say baking, they said boiling. Why is that? My time. Amarkrat limoshcha. Okay, it says here, I gave the mishmerik trumati, kokot b'nei Israel, lechanetatim limoshcha. Okay, God tells Aaron, I gave these all for you, limoshcha. Limoshcha is a sign of, is for anointing, but it really means like to be like kings, basically. And it's for you, ligdula, for your greatness. Kederach shamalachim ochlim, like the kings eat, because right, anointing was something they did for kings. It was something they did for kohanim. You're treated like kings. You get to eat the meat any way you like it. Okay. Second part of today's sugya. We're going to have a machlok at Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Tarfon about oil. Are you allowed to bring a voluntary oil offering to the temple? Okay, we know you can bring korbanot olah. We know you can bring korbanot shlamim, right? Burnt offerings, peace offerings. You can also bring mincha offerings voluntarily. Never really talks in the Torah. It talks about libations, that they poured oil and wine, but they don't talk about, can you bring an oil offering to the temple, or a wine offering. Okay, so today we're going to start with this machloket about the oil. With that, we're going to get to a machloket about the wine as well. We're going to make mention of it. And what the Gemara is going to do is basically have two statements of Shmuel, and then difficulties or dealings with what Shmuel says. Okay, so the first thing is this machloket Rabbi Tar from Rabbi Shimon. Amar Rabbi Shimon, Im ra'ita shemen shu mitchalek bazar. It's very interesting language of a Mishnah. If you see oil that's being given out to Kohanim in the temple, you can assume, okay, it says, Ein sarich lishol mahu. You don't need to ask, where is this oil coming from? Because you can assume it's from one of two things, and not one of three. That's his basic point. Ela motar rikikim in achot Yisrael. It's either the leftover oil from the rikikim of a mincha offering. This is a mincha offering called a ma'afeh tanur, which is baked in the oven. And it's baked, a lot of mincha offerings have oil mixed in the dough. This doesn't have oil mixed in the dough. You pour the oil on top after, in a key, which is a Greek letter X, okay, in an X formation. And whatever oil is left goes to the Kohanim. Okay, so you take a load of oil, do the X, whatever's left goes to the Kohanim. So if you see they're dividing up oil to the Kohanim, it must be that it's from either the leftover of this rikikei mincha, because usually in the mincha offering, the oil is all mixed in, so there wouldn't be leftover oil, or the log shemen of the mitzorah. Remember that whole thing about the log shemen? They would take it, they would put they would take a log, right, of oil, they would put the oil, they would sprinkle, right, there were 7 sprinklings they would do, then they would then they would put it on the ear and the foot and the toe and the finger of the leper. The rest would go on the head of the leper, but that was all the kohen would take in his hand. Whatever was left in the log shemen, right, in that measuring utensil, would go to the kohanim. Okay, so whatever went in the hand of the kohen, that was used, but everything else, it goes to the kohanim. So if you see them dividing up between the kohanim that are in that rotation for the week, you know that that's where it comes from. That or that, and basically we're going to see in the end of the Mishnah, but not from a shemen nidava, not from a voluntary offering. Okay, because there are no such things as voluntary offerings of oil, according to Rabbi Shimon. And likewise, in Ra'ita shemen, shunitan l'gabei ha'ishim, if you see oil on the altar, on the fire, ain't tzarich l'shomahu, you don't have to wonder what it is. I'll tell you what it is. It's one of these two things. Elamotar v'kikei minchat kohanim and minchat kohen mashiach. These are both mincha offerings. If a kohen brings a voluntary mincha offering, the Torah says, kalil tiyeh, the whole thing has to be burned. So any oil that was left over there would end up being burned as well. And the same thing with the minchat kohen mashiach. The kohen gadol had to bring every day in the morning and the evening minchat chavitin, so a griddle called. Why griddle? Because they would fry it. Now they fried it in a ton of oil, apropos Hanukkah tonight. So when you fry latkes in a lot of oil, what happens? You have a lot of oil left over. Okay, so they would put, it was 3 log of oil. Usually it's 1 log. This had 3 log of oil. It's a lot more oil. They would fry it up after there was, I think it was baked first, maybe, I forget. But they would prepare, I think it's just prepared with that oil and then fried. So when you fry it, there's a lot of extra oil. All that extra oil gets burned on the altar as well. And the mincha gets burned on the altar, and the entire mincha, and the oil. So it's obviously from there, she'ein min nadvim shemen, because there is no such thing as a voluntary offering of oil. Therefore, when you see oil either being given to the kohanim, it's one of 2 options. If it's that, it's one of 2 options. So if it's on the fire. Rabbi Tarfon, where min nadvim shemen, he disagrees completely, and he says, what do you mean? People can bring voluntary offerings of oil. Comes Shmuel, and I'm a bet now, and he says, Amar Shmuel, l'divrei Rabbi Tarfon min nadev shemen, kumtzo v'shirav nechalim. If you're going to bring shemen, okay, according to Rabbi Tarfon, how would they do it? Shmuel says very simply, it would be just like a mincha. What do you do with a mincha? The kohen takes a kometz, his 3 middle fingers, picks up some of the dough, right, scrapes off the extra with the sides of his other 2 fingers, brings it, puts it in a sanctified vessel, brings it on the altar, burns it, the rest is given to the kohanim. He says the same exact thing with the oil. Now, there's a big debate here. Does he do it with his fingers, try to do oil with your fingers? Most of the commentators actually think that's what he does. Some people say he actually does it with a vessel, which makes a little more sense and a little more clean, I would say. But anyway, that issue aside, some is taken out, burned on the altar. The rest is given out to the kohanim. Now, this works perfectly for the Mishnah, because what did Rabbi Shimon say? It's either this, right? If it's given out to kohanim, it's either that or that, not from a nadav of shemen, because the shirayim, right? The remainder would have been given to the kohanim if there was such a thing as nidvat shemen. And according to the seifa, the second part, if you see it burned on the fire, well, it's not the kometz of the oil. Okay, that works perfectly. And in fact, right, we're going to say my time. So first we're going to say what's his reason, and then Rabbi Zeir is going to bring a proof from our Mishnah. My time, Amar korban mincha. Okay, when it talks about bringing a voluntary offering of a mincha in chapter 2 of Vayikra, it says v'nefesh ki takriv korban mincha l'Hashem. If you bring a sacrifice of a mincha, okay, or when you bring a korban mincha, you don't need to say korban mincha. It's obvious what's a mincha if not a korban. You could have gotten rid of that word. Korban must be to include also oil. Okay, mila nadvim shemen. This is Rabbi Tarfon's source. Now, how are we going to get what Shmuel says, that it's kometz and sheirav nechalim? Well, now it's obvious. V'chi mincha, it's like a mincha. Ma mincha komtza v'shirei nechalim. Just like there, you don't burn the whole thing, unless it's the kohen's one, but we're talking about a regular mincha here. The kometz is burned, the handful, and the rest is eaten by the kohanim. Af shemen komtza v'sherav nechalim. Same thing. The kohanim get to eat the oil, and obviously I assume they don't eat it straight, right? They just use it for their food. Okay. Amar Rabbi Zeir afan nami tamina. Rabbi Zeir proves it from our Mishnah, specifically from this part. He says, Amar Rabbi Shimon, Ra'ita shemen shemitchalek b'azara. He says, I'm going to prove it from the beginning of the Mishnah. Because if you see them giving out shemen to the kohanim, you don't have to wonder that maybe it's from a nadav shemen, because there is no, right? Because there is no such thing. But what do you infer from there? If there was such a thing, it would be given out to the kohanim, right? So obviously either the leftover of the rikikei minchot or the log shemen of the mitzorah. She'ein medadvim shemen, because there is no shemen. Voluntary offering. Bichlal, from here you can infer demanda amar medadvim, the one who says yes, there's Nadava, which is Rabbi Tarfon. Mitchalek, it would have been given out to the Kohanim because the remainder is given to the Kohanim. Amalei Abai says, what do you mean? I can prove from the end of the Mishnah the opposite of what you're saying. Now, this isn't what I said before, but let's listen. He says, in Ra'ita Shemen Shinitana Gabeishim, now, if you see it on the fire, it's not going to be from a nadava. From here you can infer, so from the Seifa, it sounds like, this isn't what I said before, but it sounds like if you could do a nadava of shemen, the whole thing would be burnt on the altar. So, Labai Kashi Resha, the Rabbi Zera Kashi Seifa, so each one has a problem. How are you going to resolve it? And that's what I said. According to Rabbi Zera, it's very easy. There's going to be, if it was given to the Kohanim, what would it be? Theoretically, if there was a Nadava, and it was from that, it would be the Shirayim. And the part that was on the fire would have been the Komets. That works perfectly. But La Abaye, who thinks the whole thing is burned, the Resha really makes no sense. Because, well, why would you tell me if you see it given out to the Kohanim, well, don't worry, it's not a Nadava because there's no such thing. But if there was such a thing as a nadava, they could be giving out to the kohanim. According to Abaye, if you offer oil to the altar, you have to burn the whole thing. So that doesn't make any sense. The first part of the Mishnah, no one would have thought it was being given out to kohanim because the kohanim don't get any part of it. To which he answers, Tana Reisha Atu Seifa. When Rabbi Shimon said at the end of the Mishnah, and really when he said in the beginning, don't think it's anything else, right? And the Emin Nadvim Shemin kind of refers to both because both languages in the first part and the second part are, don't think it's anything else. You don't need to ask because it's obvious what it is. Well, the reason he said in the beginning, don't need to ask is not relevant because obviously you don't need to ask because obviously there's no Nidvat Shemin. But because even if there was, right, it wouldn't be given out to the Kohanim anyway. So you didn't really need to say it there, but you only said it there because of the Seifa, Atu Seifa, because you wanted the language at the end of the Mishnah to match the language at the beginning of the Mishnah, so you add it in the beginning also. So the Gemara says, wait, is that the way Mishnah would work? Bishlam Seifa, Tani Mishum Reisha. Often we have it where the Reisha used a certain language in the beginning and then they continued at the end even though it wasn't relevant. But Ela Reisha Mishum Seifa Mitani. Do they ever do that where they start off with a language because they know where they want to end and then they kind of match the language like that? And yeah, they do. On Rib Marav in Israel, they say Tana Reisha Mishum Seifa. Okay, you could do that. In which case, in the end, right, we explain now the two different ways to read the Mishnah. So the Mishnah actually could work according to both interpretations. Either according to Shmuel, that part of it gets burned, but the handful, but the rest of it gets given to the Kohanim, or the other option of Abaye, who's basically saying that no, the whole thing gets burned, and really, Rabbi Shimon's point about Emin Nadvim Shemin is really on the end, and even though you use this language in the beginning, you don't need to check what it is. Okay, but that was just because he wanted to get there eventually at the end of the Mishnah. Okay, Tashma, now we're going to have a difficulty on Shmuel from a Tosefta. Yayin kedivrei Rabbi Akiva lisfalim, Shemin kedivrei Rabbi Tarfon liishim. Okay, now we're going to learn about wine. According to Rabbi Akiva, you could also offer a voluntary wine offering to the temple. Not everyone agrees with this either. But, okay, what would you do with it if you did? If you're Rabbi Akiva, what do you do with it? You pour it in those cups. Remember, there were two holes that went all the way down into the ground. And then they would pour it into the cup. And obviously, they would pour the whole thing. Okay, there's no kamitza here or anything else. Shemen, so just like Rabbi Akiva, it goes into the sfalim. According to Rabbi Tarfon, if there's nadava of shemen, voluntary offerings of oil, it goes liishim, to the fire. Now, what does it mean it goes to the fire? Just like you pour all the wine. My lab midiyayin kula lisfalim. The wine gets completely poured into the cups. Shemen kula liishim. The oil gets completely poured on the fire. And that would go against Shmuel, who said it doesn't get completely, only the handful does. Well, midi iria hakadita hakadita. You don't need to say that. Just because it said, according to him, this goes there and that goes there, it doesn't mean, right, and according to him, that goes in this place, doesn't mean that they're done in the exact same manner. It could be the wine is completely poured in the oil. Some of it goes on the fire. It's not a proof. Okay, now I'm getting rid of the words Amarav Papa. That's based on Girsaot, okay, different versions, manuscripts. But we're going to start with the word kitanai. So now they're going to suggest that what Shmuel said and Abaye disagreed is a machloket tanaim. We're going to see. Shemen lo yifchot milog. Rebbe omer shloshet lugim. How much shemen do you bring if you're going to do a voluntary offering? According to one opinion, Tanakama, it's a log. According to Rebbe, it's 3 log. Okay, but my kamipalge, what's the root of their machloket? Amaru Rabbanan kamei Rav Papa. The rabbi said in front of Rav Papa, this is the root of the machloket. Dom mina umina, or dom mina va'oke ba'atra. What is this? We've seen this before. If you're going to derive something from somewhere else, remember we derived it from the mincha offering, the fact that there is a shemen voluntary offering. So if you're going to learn it from mincha, you're going to learn it completely from mincha. That means dom mina umina. You learn it from mincha and you learn all the details from mincha. If you say dom mina va'oke ba'atra, that means we're going to learn the basic idea from somewhere else, but the details are going to be more particular to that particular things that are more like the oil things. We're going to see what that means. Okay? So that's what Ika Benai, that's the machloka between them. The Rabbanan Savre, the rabbis held that they said 1 log, ma mincha min advim, af shemen min advim. Okay, remember, we learn all from mincha. So just like mincha could be brought voluntarily, so could oil. Umina, and the details are going to be learned from there. Ma mincha log shemen, af kan log shemen, just like a mincha is a log. Also, okay, in a mincha there's a log of oil. Also, when you volunteer, it's a log of oil. That's how they got to 1 log. And by the way, once we're already learning all the details, so this is the key, ma mincha komtza v'sheyarei nechalim, af shemen komtza v'sheyarav nechalim. So the log was important for that machloket, but the point is, if you learn the log, then you're going to say the same thing about how it's done. Just like in a mincha, you burn the komets, the rest is given to the kohen. Same thing with the oil. The idach, the other opinion, how they get to 3 log, mi mincha. Well, again, the basis is from the mincha. Ma mincha, that's how we get this idea that you can bring a voluntary oil. Ma mincha minadvim af shemen minadvim, except okay ba'atra. But when we say how much oil, we're going to learn it from the oil libations themselves, the ones that go with the korbanot. You might remember, Revi'it hahin for the keves. Revi'it hahin is a quarter of a hin. A hin is 12 log, which is 3 log. Okay, so kin nisachim, they're like the oil libations. Remember, wine and oil libations were brought with sacrifices. How much did you bring? Man nisachim, this is, by the way, the smallest amount for the sheep. Okay, for the bulls, it's even more. Man nisachim shloshet lugim, af shemen shloshet lugim. So just like in the libations, there were 3 log of oil, also here 3 log of oil. Uman nisachim kulan lisfalim. Now again, the libations, what did you do? Well, with the wine libations, you poured them completely into the cups. Af shemen kulan liishim. So likewise, the oil gets completely burnt. And that's the opinion of Abaye. But when the rabbi said this to Rav Papa, Amarle Rav Papa la Abaye, u'imi mincha maite la Rebbe, if Rebbe is really learning this from mincha, tikule almadomi naumina. If really Rebbe learned it from mincha, no, he would agree that we learn it completely from mincha. But I'm going to tell you that Rebbe didn't learn it from mincha, and that's why he gets the 3 log, because he didn't even learn it. It's not like domina ba'oke ba'atra, but learn it from mincha, but get the details somewhere else. He actually learned it from the libations themselves. Ela Rebbe me ezrach gamale. He learned it from a pasuk at the end of the libation. It talks about the libations for the sacrifices in Bamidbar Tevav, chapter 15. It says, Kol ezrach yaseh kacha. Every citizen should do like this. Now, literally that means every citizen should bring libations with their sacrifices. But what he says is that teaches you can voluntarily offer these if you want. And then that's why he learns it from there, the 3 log. But it has nothing to do with, we're going to learn it from mincha, and then it's going to tell you how this is done. Nothing to do with it. So Amarle Rav Huna Bereder Rav Natan Rav Papa, he says, what are you talking about? I disagree with you completely, Rav Papa, that he learns it from there because listen to this Braita. And then Rav Papa's going to say, oh, I guess you're right, because the Braita says so. And he's going to reject what Rav Papa said, in which case we're left with, it's a machloka tanaim between Rabbi and the rabbis, this whole thing, whether you hold like Shmuel or not. How so? Well, the Braita says, okay, so Mimatzad Amar, how could you say that? That he learns it from Ha'ezrach. There's a Braita that says, Korban Mincha, it's learned from there, Melamed Sheminadvim Shemen. That's the source for Shemen. Okay, well, we don't know this is Rebbe yet. Vikama, how much? The Braita says, Shlosha Lugin. It says 3 log. That's Rebbe's opinion. Man Shamalei Damar Shloshet Lugin. Who's the one who says 3 log? Rebbe, he. Vikamai Telemi Korban, and he learned it from the Korban Pasuk. He doesn't learn it from this other Pasuk, Hezrach. So, basically, Rav Papa picks up his hands and surrender. Amar Le'i Tanya. If you have a Braita, I can't argue with that. Okay, so in the end, what we did was we brought Shmuel here to explain Rabbi Tarfon that it's, you take a kometz and the shirayim are eaten. And then, basically, Rabbi Zera proved it from the Mishna. Abai disproved it from the Mishna. We had 2 ways of reading the Mishna. Maybe the Mishna means really you burn the whole thing. And then we basically said that we brought a difficulty on Shmuel, resolved it, and then we said actually it's a machloka tanaim, and they managed to prove it even though they tried to disprove it, but it really is a machloka tanaim. Last thing, Shmuel. Another statement of Shmuel, and now we're talking about wine. What do you do with the wine when you offer libations of wine? You pour into the cup. But when you do a nidava, a voluntary wine offering to the altar, what do you do with it? Amar Shmuel, you pour it on the fire. What's the problem? Well, there's a pasuk that says, don't put out the fire on the altar. Now, when you pour wine on the fire, what's going to happen? It's going to start going out. Maybe not completely, but somewhat. And you're going to do a negative prohibition of lo tichabeh. So, my taima, what's the reason why you put it on the fire? He says, Amar Kra, v'yayin takriv l'nesach hatziyahin, isher reach nichach la'Hashem. Well, it says there, yayin is broad, and that's where you learn that you can bring a voluntary offering. It says ishe. Ishe means esh, fire. Bring it on the fire. V'hakamechabe, but aren't you putting it out? As I mentioned, okay, the Gemara didn't mention it till right here. Aren't you putting out the fire? Kiboy b'mixat lo shmei kiboy. They say, you're putting it out a little bit, that's not a problem. Gemara says, what do you mean that's not a problem? Ini v'hamar Rav Nachman amar Rav Ravua. Source number one, we're going to have three sources here. Hamorid gachelet me'al gabei hamizbeach v'kiba. If you took a coal off the altar and it went out, chayav, you're liable. And then, what's the assumption? Well, there must be more coals than that. You didn't put out the fire. You just lessened it by taking out a coal. To which the Gemara has two suggestions. Deleka elahai, maybe that was the only one that was there. Or yibait ema, kiboy de mitzvah shane. Or maybe in our case it's for a mitzvah, so we'll allow it. And that was just done for no reason. And that's not allowed. Tashma, second source. Tana Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Now you're supposed to clean out the ashes, remember? What if the fire's still going and you can't get there to clean out the ashes? You might have thought maybe you could put out the fire. Now that's l'tzorach mitzvah, right? Like we just said, maybe it's allowed for a mitzvah, but here you see it's not allowed for a mitzvah. So amarta lo yichabeh. No, you're not allowed to put it out. So you have to just wait. You can't do that. So they say, okay, but shani hatam, that's not the same as here. Here, if you want to do the mitzvah, the only way to do it is to pour it on, if you assume it's to pour on the fire, the only way to do it is to pour on the fire, and it's going to have to go out. You have no choice. So to do the mitzvah will allow it. In the Trumat Hadeshen, you could just wait. Okay, after the yativ v'natar, you could just wait, and eventually the coals will, diminish the heat until you can actually sweep out the ashes. Okay, last and final source for today. Tashma yayin l'divrei Rabbi Akiva l'sfalim. Okay, you might have been thinking this before. The writer said that according to Rabbi Akiva, you pour it in the cups when you offer a voluntary wine libation. How can you say you put it on the fire? And shemen kedivrei Rabbi Tarfon liishim. Only the oil gets burned on the fire. Ve'od Tanya, and another writer says yayin l'nesach l'sfalim o eno ela liishim. Right? Maybe you put the yayin in the cups, or maybe fire. Amarta lo yichabeh. Okay, it's obvious because it says don't put out the fire. So of course you don't put on the fire. So how is Shmuel saying what he says? Okay, you ready for the answer? Bring us back to L'chot Shabbat. Big famous machloket. Davar she'enu mitkavin, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. Remember, what if I'm doing a malacha? I'm doing an action. I don't mean for the action, right? I'm pouring water over the grass. I'm not meaning to water the grass. I'm just pouring water on my hands. It's a bit more of a different issue because it's a psik reisha, but where it's definitely going to happen, but that's a whole other question, and I want it to happen. Okay, here I don't really want it to happen, so it's not a psik reisha denichale, where I actually want it to happen. But there's a big machlok at Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. Since I wasn't intending for the malacha to happen, am I liable? Am I responsible or not? So, lo kasha ha Rabbi Yehuda ha Rabbi Shimon. We're going to say, look, when I pour the wine on the altar, I'm not intending to put out the fire. So if you hold by Rabbi Shimon, the davar she'enu mitkavin, I wasn't intending it, is permitted, then yeah, we allow you to put the wine on. So that holds by Rabbi Shimon. But if you hold by the other opinion, Rabbi Yehuda, who says davar she'enu mitkavin usher, then you can't do it there, and that's why you would pour it into the sfalim. So we now have this Tanaitic debate based on this other Tanaitic debate about whether or not it goes on the fire or the in those holes, is based on this machlokah Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and we'll stop here and we'll pick up with this Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon issue tomorrow. Okay, so we did a few things today. We started with the questions. Tadir Mekudash Ezemehem Kodem. We had Tadir V'Sheno Tadir, and then you did the Ne'eno Tadir. Do you stop or do you finish it, right, or mix the blood? No answers to either of those questions. Then we started with this topic: can you be Midadev Shevin or not? Machlokah Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Tarfon. Then Shmuel was explaining Rabbi Tarfon's position and basically said that how do you do it, right? We had two debates between Shmuel and others about how you do when you do the voluntary oil and how you do the voluntary wine. What gets put on the altar, what doesn't. Is anything, right, from the wine, maybe nothing goes on the altar, maybe all of it goes on the altar. According to with the oil, maybe the komets goes on the altar and the rest goes to the kohanim, or the whole thing gets burned completely. That's it for today. Wishing everyone a good day. Shavua Tov, happy Hanukkah, and we'll meet up tomorrow. And then, like I said, after that, we'll have a week where everything will just go up on its own, and we'll meet back up on Tuesday.